So, hi everyone. My name is Evelyn Bettels and I work at L'Occitane. So, can I have a show of hands? How many of you know L'Occitane en Provence? Oh, awesome. Great. How many of you own a product of L'Occitane and are currently using it? Yes? How many of you have already bought a Christmas present? From L'Occitane? Great. Oh, perfect. So I'm glad to see so many people actually know the brand. There were, believe it or not, a few others that actually looked at me going like, what exactly are you doing and what is your brand about? So I am really happy to talk about this topic today with you, and I'm going to explain a little bit. I'll give you two examples of how we drive consumer centricity in the organization. So the brand was founded in 1976 in France, but we're now headquartered in Geneva. So the central team, you know, the strategy, everything is developed in Geneva. We have marketing, communication, packaging, but everything is still produced in the south of France. So in Manosque, where our factory is, which by the way you can visit anytime you go to south of France. Super interesting, and so it's truly, you know, a very, let's say, French-anchored brand, but based in Geneva. And then, of course, we are globally distributed, so we have stores everywhere. We have roughly, if I'm not mistaken, 3,000 stores around the globe, without counting the travel retail as well, which also is quite a big and important business for us, which obviously you can imagine was strongly hit by the pandemic. And so I'm in charge of consumer market insights at L'Occitane. And basically what that means is that I have the great pleasure of feeding the organizations with insights from consumers, existing customers, but also market trends. So I actually work, sitting inside the marketing organization. I'm trying to really understand, you know, what are the current unmet needs of our consumers in terms of product, but also in terms of communication. So I am, you know, really transversal in that sense. And when it comes to the relationship to the markets, I also run the occasional study in Japan, China, or US to better understand their consumers and their local needs. So with that being said, we're a really small team. I have two other people in my team, in the central team. So one is specifically focused on A/B testing online and social listening, and the other person is only 50% with me and 50% in brand management and marketing. So it is quite challenging. We have to optimize the ways of working and find ambassadors across the company to really kind of, let's say, bring along this story of consumer mindset with us. And I'm sorry, I'm going to keep my cheat sheet in my hand because I'm too nervous to let go of those papers. But why is consumer centricity so important? I think I don't need to elaborate it that much here in this audience because you're all, you know, the same kind of species. But it is important, at least in my reality, to keep reminding it again and again and again to our business stakeholders, because it all sounds like super nice, right? Consumer centricity, doing market research, being closer to your market and whatever. But when it comes to priority setting, often it gets like put, you know, aside, and you know, short-time business goals become much more important than sales numbers and things like that. So for my role and all employees at L'Occitane, those are our company values. And entrepreneurialship is really, really big. So it's, I mean, and what you mean by entrepreneurialship, you can have your own definition, right? But what it means for us as CMI, it means that we have the liberty of trying new things, either testing and learning new methodologies or actually testing in real stores. So the beauty of being a retailer is that we don't take too much risks. We produce what we have to produce, put it in store and see if it sells or not. We can also test in store immediately and you know, get feedback from our customers that are coming into the store on how to optimize their shopper journey. Of course, we have to apply a certain pragmatic and also be, you know, not just test and learning anything, but it has to be really adding value. And it has to be agile as well. And so basically what we want to do is to continue learning and understanding not just the customers that come into store, the current existing customers of L'Occitane, but also the future customers. And this is potentially one of the, I wouldn't say weaknesses, but maybe sometimes I have to remember remind the organizations to also think outside of our own universe, because we think a lot about our existing customers. How can we please them better? What products are they buying more? How can we cross-sell, etc.? But it's really also my job as a CMI is to understand what are the future customers' needs. So what is the wider population thinking of the brand and our products and our services? Have they bought us once but never come back? What's the problem? So basically, this is the ambition to merge the two and have the entire organization thinking, taking a step back and thinking of the consumer as a whole person and not just once she is already converted into the brand. And with that being said, of course, we can fuel the innovation pipeline with new products, but we can also start thinking about how we can recruit new consumers into the brand. New consumers in terms of profiles, but also in terms of category, for instance. And then, of course, the personalization online is also super, super important for us. And let me just take a breath. I realize that I speak very fast. I forget to breathe. So it's a great ambition, right? But we also have a challenge at L'Occitane, which is, well, of course, I have a very small team, a very small budget, but that's not just the only challenge. It's sometimes when we think about consumer centricity, it may be more relevant for people working in marketing in Geneva, but it's really hard sometimes for local teams or for like the laboratory people in Manosque thinking what's reality in China, right? So it's really hard. They're so far removed from our market reality that it's really hard for them to develop an empathy towards the consumer in China, in Japan, in the US, and so on. Yet they are the ones who are developing our products. So they have to find a way, or I have to find a way to bring this consumer to those people, to really make sure that they are considering the needs of a Chinese hair care consumer, for instance, because she may not have the same texture of hair as we do in Europe, for instance, just to give you an example. Another thing we hear a lot is by the local teams is, oh, we know our consumer and our market the best. You're in Europe, in your ivory tower, you have no idea. I know my consumers. That's probably true. I haven't lived abroad to be able to know every single consumer across the world, but at the same time, I know exactly that these people probably don't spend any time with their consumers, either in store or somewhere. It's mostly based on their personal perception or their friends and family around. So they keep saying, yes, I know my market, I know my consumer, but often it's actually lacking of kind of really substantial data or insights. And often, we go into a kind of a power game between, as in, who knows better. And this is when I step in and say, let's listen to the consumer and let's look at data, and then we all take like an informed decision together. And as I said before, consumer centricity is an important topic for us all, and we all want to play with it. But the truth is really, when there is a more important or priority topic popping up, it's really quickly, put aside or forgotten. So that's why we need to continue talking about it and repeat it again and again. So we have the advantage of being a retailer. So we have two sources of information that are really invaluable for us. We have a lot of customer data, which is basically anyone who buys a L'Occitane product in our store or online and is willing to share their data with us, we can actually then track and analyze their purchase behavior. So we have done a lot of work in the last 2 years to better understand our existing customers, their path within the brand, how they evolve from the first purchase to the second purchase, the third, and so on, until they become really loyal ones. which categories they tend to buy or products, which cross, really basket analysis in depth, and that helped us understand as well the conversion potential of such and such category. So that's a great job that we've been doing. And the second point here is, as you can see, the retail staff. So those are our beauty advisors, and they are really at the forefront of our markets and our consumers. They face the customers every day. They sell the products, and if they do not believe in the products themselves, then they're probably not really well in recommending them, right, to sell them. So they are really an additional resource of information or source of information that we value very much. So we actually have not just consumer first, but BA first as a motto internally, because we want to drive the bottom-up feedback as well, and not just the top-down. So it's really a two-way conversation between what's going on in the stores and in the market, because they can tell us immediately, how the customers respond to a new product or how a selling speech works. So we are using them more and more on our toolbox development in terms of training, in terms of product positioning, in terms of in-store layout, all of these things. So really a very, very important part of our business decisions are made thanks to our beauty assistants. So, for instance, I'm going to talk very briefly about an example here of a product that we launched. It's called Reset Eyes, and it's basically an eye serum. You put that under your eyes, and the next morning you wake up totally refreshed, and your skin is reset and beautiful. So we did send a couple of samples, or actually we sent 6 months prior to launch, we sent a few product samples out to our BAs in France and in Taiwan, so that they can test the products themselves. So they can immediately tell the effect that it may have on their skin or not. They can take pictures of themselves before and after. They can tell us about how easy or not it is to use, and they can give us immediately feedback on, this is how I would sell it with my customers, or this is what I would say, and this is what I really like about it. So it was really super interesting to do this test with them, because it not only helped us to define the toolbox of the training that was then rolled out globally, but it was really helping us to fine-tune afterwards the whole kind of shopping experience in the store. So you can see that we had product claims that were revised, that were much more easy to remember, stronger in terms of conversion rate, let's say, but also we could test in some of the stores already some of the merchandising execution and then optimize it through that. So that was really, really awesome for us. And as a bonus, we got a lot of BA GC, generated content, instead of UGC or CGC, and which we then could use not only for internal purposes but also external purposes. So this is, and when you have a BA or a person who is in a store next door where you always go to, and is a person of trust, and you have a real relationship with that person, you believe much more if she actually posts things of herself on social media. So this is very, very successful with our customers as well. As another example I'd like to talk about is, I think it's in the title of my speech here, it's the Gen Z design thinking, and basically what we get is either a very complex question that wants to know everything about everyone, or a very corporate kind of question that's not very consumer-centric, right? So for instance, how can we recruit younger customers? Well, that's kind of broad, and why would younger customers, even want to buy us? What's the point? So we, in a design thinking approach, or actually in general, we always try to challenge our business partners, our stakeholders, to rethink the question and try to put it in a more consumer-centric way. So it's like, okay, you want to grow the business, fine, but what's in it for the customer? Another example I had, and I'm sorry if I add a little bit of a complexity here, but we had a question about how can we collect more data of our customers that were in spas and they're not coming to our stores. Well, that's not the question. The question is how can you prolong the brand experience after having had a fantastic spa experience and make them come back into store. So nothing about data collection, it's more about the brand experience, right? So it's sometimes quite challenging to get to these consumer-centric questions, and sometimes they're good or sometimes they're less good. But here we ended up with a more, let's say, generic question of how can a skincare product keep up with the lifestyle of young Chinese consumers? Let me just pause here, because Chinese consumers, I added here, it wasn't in the first question. Why China? Just to give you a little bit of context, our key markets for L'Occitane are Japan, China, and US. And then later on, lately, Korea has seen a massive growth as well, thanks to Kakao Talk, which is an entirely different business model. But so clearly, Asian markets are super important for us. Before even the European markets come. So France, of course, is super important because it's our mother country. But in terms of businesses, actually, China and Japan are always like kind of, competing for the first spot. So for this Gen Z project, we decided to do a design thinking approach. And you may be familiar with the two diamonds of design thinking, where you have the discovery, the define, develop, and the deliver. And the beauty of this is really, it kind of gives you a structure and a process, and that helps you get the multifunctional team aboard, and you do a lot of iteration with the consumers. And like with, same as I said at the panel before, I truly think that qualitative research is much more powerful when you do it in person. It's the same is true for this design thinking workshops. So ideally, you would have a full week with your multifunctional team sitting in a room, and then you have consumers come in, or you actually go out to consumers' homes and you iterate along as you go along these diamonds here. But it wasn't possible for us, of course, because of COVID. So neither the research could be done in person nor the actual workshop. So we had to be a little bit more creative, let's say. So we started with classic ethnographics. People were actually, for a full week sending us pictures, videos of themselves, of their routines, where they shop, how they use products, things like that, like super intense. And then they were followed up by an in-depth interview. So single interviews to really kind of fill in the gaps that we still had. And we had a lot, like really massive amounts of insights that were generated through that. And I don't know about you, but for us, pictures and verbatims are so powerful when we present them to our stakeholders. That is just, it was just beautiful to see how it came to life. But again, we had so many insights that we had to, in the define part, we had to really define, okay, which one friction point are we going to focus on? So there's so many insights, there's so many friction points, which one are we going to choose from? And how we were going to do that is, first, through this massive discovery part, we distinguished different patterns and of different types of consumer personas within the Gen Z kind of group. And by profiling them, or kind of making it more a humanized kind of exploration, we were able to choose the one that we wanted to deep dive in, and really looking at her specific friction points and not all of them. So that was the first thing we did, and then we were looking into, okay, what is your problem and how can we address this? So we did some brainstorming sessions across 3 different teams. We had Geneva, Manosque, so that's south of France, and Paris connected to a virtual workshop. And virtual workshops just I'm not super fan of that, but if you set it up correctly, it can be actually quite fun. So we did a few of them. Because it's an iterative process, right? So we had to do a few of them. And there are ways nowadays of doing brainstorm differently. It's not like the classic, oh, let's just sit around the table and brainstorm on new ideas. There's actual techniques today that you can really stretch your ideas into different areas. Scenario planning is one, or the turning the problem upside down. What if it was, the opposite thing was a problem? So there's really different things that you can do that creates empathy towards the consumer, and also keeps the audience really much engaged. And it was so much fun. After 3 hours of workshop, like the team didn't even, they didn't even notice that they had just spent 3 hours with us in a workshop. And then obviously, we started developing first MVPs, which were in the format of a concept, which we then tested and refined with consumers again before we were able to launch. And all of this, is supposed to be done in a much shorter time than you have a typical product development. I have to say we probably gained maybe 6 months in this approach. It's not massive, of course, because you still need to develop, make and produce a product. But it's still, for us, it was such a big gain in terms of how we bring the consumers into the discussion and keep it, really focused on her profile, on her friction point across the multifunctional team that help us advance much faster. So the multifunctional team, including the laboratory scientist in Manosque, the marketing person in Geneva, the CRM person in Paris, everybody was fully immersed in this consumer-centric approach. And we created a fantastic team collaboration which set the project up for success, really. The earlier you include them, the better it goes. We spend a lot of time in thinking of how should we set up these workshops to make them fun and empathetic. And honestly, it's worth it because, again, it was just a fun time to spend together, even though it was virtual. It was not, we weren't able to go for a drink afterwards, but it was still really, really nice. And it was very, very powerful in terms of outcome as well, which then obviously resulted into a great team engagement. So to conclude, in terms of consumer-centric mindset, I wanted to leave you with these 4 points. First, give them access to data and insights, but in a way that is actually digestible for them. So, for instance, in the Gen Z study, we had so much data and insights and verbatims and photos and videos and everything, but we worked with a very capable agency locally who was able to narrow it down and do the work with us to come up with these personas. And it was much easier to talk about Chenny from Shanghai that has this kind of lifestyle and bring it to life in a way that it makes sense to your audience. And that was really a great help to start there. Whenever we can, we send them out to meet real consumers. It wasn't the case for the Gen Z because of COVID, but for instance, it just helps sometimes to go into our stores and start observing. Again, it's an advantage that we have today, and we are coming up to Christmas, so it's an easy thing. Just go there and observe and look at how they navigate in store. If you can, start talking to people and ask them questions. That's the second point. And then remote workshops, I think I mentioned it already. Make it fun for the people and really try to yourself develop some empathy towards your audience and set it up in a way so that it's not boring, yet still very actionable outcome. The final point is be a challenger, and that's particularly true for a design thinking approach. One thing that I noticed is that at the beginning, everybody is like, yes, let's be consumer-centric and we're going to focus on friction points, blah, blah, blah. But very quickly they go into, let's find a solution, and I work in packaging, I want to bring they immediately go back into their silos and they forget about the friction point. They just think about the solution, right? So you have to bring them back. Okay, is this really consumer-centric? Is this really what it, how it addresses the friction point? Is this really your consumer? And I cannot tell you how often I had to repeat that again and again. But it's really stretching people's minds into ways that are interesting to see. So with that, merci beaucoup.
Wow, impressive. It really is.
Thank you.
Such a holistic approach, like how it has to be, actually. So, are there any questions?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I really like the intent. Even you're such a small team and still you're making a big change. My question is more about the future. So you said about the challenges. We are small. One of our people is even like 50% working on that. So definitely you're not happy with the current state, I assume, at least from what you were sharing. So what's your plan? What's next? How are you planning to be bigger and drive a bigger impact?
Yes, well, and there's two ways to answer this. Before I came to this conference, I had already some ideas in mind on how we can evolve in the future. Now I have a few more. So I'm definitely going to come back and use some of the things that I saw at the conference and suggest to do similar ways or adapt it to L'Occitane in terms of, the data structure, in terms of, having really all the voice of customer sources coming to one place and having a holistic view on the consumer and not have the CRM team, the CMI team, the e-commerce team, and so on and so forth. So really having a bit more kind of a centralized approach in that sense. That would be one of my recommendations. The second thing that is going to happen, it's already planned, is that as of January next year, 2022, we are going to restructure the organization and group the marketing teams into squads. So basically you will have a multifunctional team working on one category or one given product, and they're going to go into agile mode. So they're going to apply all the agile methodology, and they're going to be probably much faster in terms of bringing things to life. And as such, they will be more consumer centric. So they have to be, because otherwise they're not going to be making any sense. So what I'm doing today is I train this organization before they actually shift into squads. I train them on some of the basics of CMI. How can you develop a consumer-centric mindset? What are the right questions to ask in qual, in quant? What some of the methodologies that we can do. So there's a lot of education going on now up front before we actually shift into the new organization. So, and with that, hopefully I'll find some ambassadors then across the organization that can, help going up in maturity in terms of consumer centricity.
Evelyn, thank you a lot for the presentation. You shared a lot of interesting insights in terms of how to conduct research with the shop assistants or personnel who is working in the shop, and also on the product research. But what focus do you put on the brand and understanding of the brand and future of the brand?
So the brand strategy is also something we are tracking in my team. So we do regular brand image surveys with Kantar. Every 2 to 3 years, we analyze, consumers' perception of the brand versus competition in our 10 key markets. The next one is coming up in 2022, so I'm super excited to see that. That's one way of how we look on how the brand is perceived overall. What we also started doing is that, because the last Kantar study was done in 2019, since then we have changed a lot in terms of how we talk about the brand, our commitments, our communication channels. So the local teams actually really needed something more robust and concrete in terms of whether their local investment actually pay out or not. So we started doing internal surveys amongst our existing customer database to see if what we tell them is actually entering their brains and it's becoming top of mind. So you have to probably know that our customer database gets a lot of information from us. So if you're on our mailing list, you probably see a lot of information about our commitments and everything we do, right? All the beautiful things that we do. So obviously the customers should be knowing the best about the brand, and we want to see how that evolves. So we're tracking not only NPS and CSAT, but also on our specific communication angles on biodiversity, on plastic reduction, reducing waste, and so on. We're actually trying to track how this is perceived by our customers today. So this is again, you know, beauty of having your own customer database where you can track your internal brand perception.
Thank you so much for a great presentation. It really resonates with me, your experience while you were sharing about doing the workshops online. So we did lots of things in Colgate, also online workshops, and it was very hard to adopt this new practice. I'm very curious to learn how you survived during this crisis when it comes to budget cuts, because it's not a surprise that many companies are going through this difficult period of time. Do you have any tricks to share when it comes to return on investments? So like to justify the expenses and to ask for maybe bigger budget to do bigger things and to justify this, the space at the table with the senior executives. So if you have any tricks to share, would be very delighted to hear. Thank you so much. Delighted by the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. But to start with, I have a tiny budget and I couldn't negotiate anymore. So I had to be finding new ways of answering the questions I had on the table, whilst always reminding them, by the way, if I had money, I could give you much more. So that's also a good way of getting there. But yeah, so I did a lot of desk research. Like especially during the pandemic, there was so much information from everywhere. I mean, Kantar, McKinsey, everyone was talking about COVID and the impact of, you know, the behavioral shift and everything. So I used a lot of that, Mintel as well, gold mine of information. So I basically spend a lot of time on desktop working, and then leveraging what we have at hand. So for instance, doing a customer research, like, a survey amongst our existing customer costs me nothing if you don't count my time as you know, if you don't monetize my time. So I can easily say, I want to know more about how somebody likes our hand cream or so on, or who is this customer who buys this and that. And I run it internally through a DIY approach. So this saves a lot of money. And I think in the last, I did a calculation for our budget review where I looked at all the in-house research that we've done in DIY mode. If we had done it with an external partner, we would have paid 250,000 euros, roughly. I mean, I did like, you know, but this was like massive. So they saw immediately the value that we contributed through the number of studies that we've done and the actual budget that you would need if you wanted to have a much deeper insight. And I only covered the basics with the 250,000, right? So it's so that's another way of kind of let's say proving or monetizing your value in all you do. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks for your presentation, Eveline. So following on from the last question, if you were the CEO of L'Occitane, what 3 changes would you make today to your insight function? It can be the budget that you have, the strategic role you have, a seat on a board, kind of what would you do? Obviously with commerciality in mind, but what if you were the CEO, what would you do?
Wow, that's a tough question. Tough question. Well, first, and I hope we're getting there because I can already see like the open-mindedness of going into a more consumer-centric mindset or having these new organizations and things. So clearly, having a more holistic view of consumer when she is still a prospect and when she becomes a customer. So combining different sources of data that we have today totally in silos spread across the company and having one view. So potentially, you know, I don't want to talk about a centralized team because consumer centricity should be in everybody's minds and should be on top of everybody's lists, right? It's not just me or the people in my team. It should be the CRM manager in the market. It should be the lady in the store who sells. It should be everybody's priority. But I think we could do probably more if we better use the data that we have today. So data scientists, AI, ML, all these things, I think I would probably focus a little bit more on.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.